For 50 years, one man carried a truth too heavy for any heart to hold. My name is Daniel Reyes, and before my time runs out, I need you to hear what I've spent a lifetime trying to forget. Between 1974 and 1991, in the barren borderlands of northern Mexico and southern Texas, I encountered something the world still refuses to believe in, a creature that wasn't supposed to exist, a creature that watched us, studied us, and revealed truths about humanity far more terrifying than its teeth. People called it El Chupacabra, a monster, a story. But monsters aren't always what we think they are. This is not a legend. This is not folklore. This is my confession. And before the last beat of my tired heart, I'm finally ready to tell you what really happened in those long, dark nights, and why the creature's greatest secret was about us. My name is Daniel Reyes. I am 89 years old, and my hands shake when I try to button my shirt. The doctors tell me my heart is tired, an understatement if I've ever heard one. After carrying a secret for more than 50 years, I suppose every part of me is tired. Between 1974 and 1991, in the dry borderlands between northern Mexico and southern Texas, I encountered the same creature again and again. Not once, not twice, dozens of times over nearly 2 decades. Long enough for it to show me things about humanity that I wish I could forget. Long enough for me to understand that the real monster was never the thing with red eyes and sharp teeth hiding in the dark. The real monster was us. This is the truth I have avoided my entire adult life. This is why I cannot hold it in anymore. I was 38 years old and recently divorced when I took the job at Rancho San Miguel. My ex-wife, Gloria, had gotten the house in Monterey, the car, and custody of our son, Miguel, who was 12 and barely looked at me during the custody hearing. The judge asked him which parent he wanted to live with, and Miguel stared at his shoes and whispered, "Mama." I didn't blame him. I had been a poor husband and an even worse father. Too many nights at the bar, too many broken promises, too much anger I couldn't explain or control. Gloria's lawyer called me emotionally absent. He wasn't wrong. So I ran, packed everything I owned into a canvas duffel bag, climbed into my beat-up '68 Chevrolet C10, and drove north until the highways turned to dirt roads, and the dirt roads turned to nothing but dust and thorn bushes. Rancho San Miguel sat 40 kilometers from the nearest town, a sprawling, failing cattle operation owned by a man named Arturo Salinas. Arturo was in his 60s, with a face like sun-dried leather and eyes that had seen too many bad seasons. He hired me on the spot when I told him I was willing to work nights and didn't ask many questions. "Something is killing my animals," he said in Spanish, lighting a hand-rolled cigarette. "Goats, mostly. A few dogs. Once, a calf. Always at night. Always the same marks." "What kind of marks?" I asked. He exhaled smoke through his nose and looked past me, toward the horizon where the hills turned purple in the evening light. "Punctures, in the neck, clean, like needles. And the blood." He trailed off, shaking his head. "There is no blood on the ground. The bodies, they look empty, deflated, like a balloon." I thought he was exaggerating. Ranchers always exaggerated when they wanted cheap labor and someone to blame when things went wrong. "Coyotes," I suggested. "I thought so, too. But there are no tracks, no tearing, no—" He gestured vaguely. "No mess. Coyotes are messy. This is something else. What do you think it is?" Arturo crushed his cigarette under his boot and met my eyes for the first time. "I think it is something that does not want to be seen." He paid 300 pesos a week, plus a cot in the storage shed and whatever food I could scrounge from the ranch kitchen. I took it. I had nowhere else to go. The ranch was bigger than I expected, sprawling across a valley between 2 low ridges of limestone and scrub. There were goat pens near the main house, a chicken coop that listed to one side like a drunk, a barn that smelled of hay and rust, and beyond that, open land that stretched toward the darkening hills. My job was simple: patrol the property from sundown to sunup, check the pens, make sure the gates were locked, and keep an eye out for whatever was killing the animals. Arturo gave me a flashlight with a weak battery, a revolver that looked older than I was, and a thermos that didn't keep anything warm for more than an hour. The first 3 nights were uneventful. I walked the perimeter, checked the fences, smoked cigarettes in the dark, and listened to the wind move through the dry grass like something breathing. The sky was enormous out here, black and thick with stars I hadn't seen since I was a child. The silence pressed against my ears. On the fourth night, everything changed. It was just after midnight when the goat started screaming. Not bleating, screaming. A high, panicked chorus that cut through the night like a siren. I grabbed the flashlight and ran, my boots kicking up dust, the beam bouncing wildly against the ground. My heart hammered in my chest, adrenaline sharpening everything, the smell of dirt and animal fear, the sound of my own breathing, the weight of the revolver slapping against my thigh. The goat pen was 50 meters from the main house, surrounded by a low chain-link fence. When I got there, the flashlight beam caught movement, something low and fast, crouched over one of the goats near the far corner of the pen. At first, I thought it was a dog, a sick dog, starving, desperate. Then it raised its head and looked at me. The beam of my flashlight caught its face, and every rational thought I had ever held evaporated. Its eyes reflected red, like an animal's, but larger, more forward-facing. The head was narrow, almost reptilian, with a pronounced snout and a mouth that seemed too wide, lined with teeth that were long, needle-thin, and numerous. The body was lean and muscular, covered in mottled gray-green skin with patches of coarse, bristle-like hair along the spine. Its hind legs were long and digitigrade, bent like a kangaroo's, and its forelimbs were shorter but ended in long, dexterous fingers tipped with black claws. It was kneeling over a goat, one hand pressed against the animal's neck. The goat twitched once, a weak spasm, and then went completely still. The creature stared at me. I raised the revolver. My hand shook so badly I could barely aim. My mouth was dry. My legs felt like they were made of wet sand. "Get away from it," I said in Spanish, my voice cracking. "Get away, or I'll shoot." The creature did not move. It watched me with an intelligence that froze me in place. Not the blank, instinctual stare of a predator, but something deeper, calculating, aware. It tilted its head slightly, like a dog trying to understand a new sound. Then, slowly, deliberately, it stepped back from the goat. It spread its fingers, palms facing me, in what looked disturbingly like a gesture of peace. I didn't shoot. I don't know why. Maybe it was the way it moved, careful and controlled, as if it understood what a gun was and what I was capable of. Maybe it was the exhaustion in its posture, the way its ribs showed through its skin, the deep scars that crisscrossed its chest and flanks. Or maybe it was the way it looked at me, not with hunger, but with something that felt almost like recognition. We stood there, the creature and I, separated by 30 feet of dust and wire fencing, staring at each other under a sky full of indifferent stars. The goat lay between us, its body already cooling, 2 small puncture wounds visible on its neck. Finally, the creature lowered itself onto all fours. It glanced once more at the goat, then at me, and then it turned and vanished into the darkness with a speed and silence that shouldn't have been possible for something that size. I stood there for a long time, flashlight beam trembling against the ground, trying to convince myself that I had imagined it, that exhaustion and isolation had conjured something that wasn't real. But the goat was real, the punctures were real, and somewhere out in the dark, beyond the reach of my weak flashlight, something was watching me. In the morning, Arturo found the body. He knelt beside the goat, fingers probing the wounds, his face grim. "Same as the others," he muttered. "You see anything last night?" I hesitated. The lie came easily. "No. I heard the goats making noise, but by the time I got here, it was already done." He looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether I was telling the truth. Then he nodded and stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. "We'll bury it before it starts to stink. Keep watching tonight." I nodded and said nothing. What could I have said? I saw something that shouldn't exist. It had hands like a man and eyes like the devil, and it looked at me as if it understood who I was. Who would believe that? The second encounter happened 3 nights later. This time, I was ready. I had replaced the batteries in the flashlight, cleaned the revolver, and positioned myself near the goat pen before midnight, sitting on an overturned crate with my back to the barn wall. The stars wheeled overhead. The wind carried the smell of creosote and dust. My eyes grew heavy. Then I felt it, that same sensation of being watched, a pressure against the back of my skull. I turned slowly, bringing the flashlight up. The creature was standing at the edge of the pen, maybe 20 meters away, its body half hidden in shadow. It wasn't crouched this time. It stood upright, balanced on its hind legs, nearly 2 meters tall, shoulders broad and hunched, arms hanging loose at its sides. It was staring at the goats. The animals were pressed against the far side of the enclosure, their eyes rolling white, but the creature made no move to enter. It just stood there, breathing hard, its chest rising and falling rapidly, its hands flexed and unflexed, claws scraping softly against each other. I watched, transfixed, as it tilted its head back and looked up at the sky. For a long moment, it simply stood there, motionless, gazing at the stars. There was something almost plaintive in its posture, something lonely. When it finally lowered its head and turned toward me, I did not move. I kept the flashlight steady, the beam fixed on its torso, avoiding the eyes. The creature took 2 slow steps forward, then stopped. It tapped its chest 3 times with one long finger, a deliberate, measured gesture. Then it pointed at the goats. It tapped its chest again, then gestured toward its mouth. Hunger, need. The sounds it made were not words, but there was structure to them. Clicks, low hums, rhythmic pulses, a language I didn't understand, but one that carried meaning. I lowered the revolver slowly, resting it in my lap. "You're starving," I said aloud in Spanish, my voice barely above a whisper. "Aren't you?" The creature's head tilted again. It made a soft sound, almost questioning. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the sandwich I had brought, stale bread with a thin smear of beans. I unwrapped it slowly, keeping my movements deliberate, and tossed it toward the creature. It landed in the dirt between us. The creature stared at the sandwich for a long moment, then approached cautiously, sniffing. It picked up the bread with surprising delicacy, examined it, and then, to my astonishment, took a small bite. It chewed slowly, its expression unreadable, and then set the rest of the sandwich down carefully on a flat rock. Then it backed away, lowering itself onto all fours, and disappeared into the night. The next morning, the sandwich was gone. In its place, on the same rock, was a small, pale object, a bone, cleaned of every scrap of meat, arranged carefully as if it were a gift. Over the next weeks, a pattern emerged. Some nights, there were bodies. Other nights, the creature appeared at a distance, watching from the low ridge beyond the ranch. I began leaving food, scraps of bread, leftover beans, once a chicken carcass from the kitchen, and each time, something was left in return. A smooth stone, a bundle of dry thorns woven into a rough sphere, a dead lizard, its body intact, placed carefully on the rock like an offering. We were, I realized with growing unease, communicating. I started talking to it, softly, in Spanish and broken English, as if words alone could bridge the distance between us. The creature couldn't mimic my speech. Its attempts produced only distorted, guttural echoes. But it tried, it listened, it watched, and slowly, I began to see what it was seeing. It watched Arturo and his ranch hands move the goats from pen to pen, selecting the weak ones, the sick ones, the ones that wouldn't survive another season. It watched us load the healthy animals into trucks, their eyes wide with terror, and drive them away to slaughter. It watched us bury the ones that died from neglect, from heat, from thirst during the drought that had turned the creek bed into cracked mud. The creature killed to survive. We killed by the thousands, industrially, methodically, and called it farming. One night, as I sat on my crate smoking a cigarette, the creature emerged from the darkness and approached closer than it ever had before. It stopped 10 feet away and pointed at me, then at the goats, then at itself. The message was unmistakable. "You and I are the same." That was the first confession, and it terrified me more than its teeth ever could. The rains didn't come that year. By July, the creek bed was a scar of dried mud and bleached stones. The grass turned yellow, then brown, then disappeared entirely. Arturo started hauling water in a battered truck with a leaking tank, cursing the sky and the government and God in equal measure. The goats grew thin, their ribs visible, their eyes dull. The creature came more frequently. I saw it almost every other night now, hovering at the edge of the property, moving between the shadows like smoke. It was thinner, too, its spine more pronounced, its movements slower. One night in late August, it came closer than ever before. I was sitting near the empty water trough, smoking my last cigarette, when I felt the air shift. I didn't turn. I had learned by now that sudden movements made it retreat. Instead, I spoke softly. I know you're there. There was a pause, then the sound of claws scraping against stone. The creature moved into the dim circle of my flashlight's glow, crouched low, one hand resting on the ground. Up close, I could see more details. The old scars across its chest and flanks, some faded and silver, others newer and still raised. The way the skin around its eyes was darker, almost bruised, the faint tremble in its limbs that spoke of exhaustion. Between us, it placed an object, a metal canteen, dented and scratched. I recognized it. It had belonged to one of the younger ranch hands, a kid named Julio, who'd quit 2 weeks ago after claiming he'd seen the devil near the goat pens. The creature tapped the canteen, then tapped its chest, then made a sweeping gesture that took in the dry fields, the empty creek, the distant glow of town lights on the horizon. It opened its mouth wide, revealing rows of thin, needle-like teeth, and mimed drinking from the canteen. "Water," I said. "You're talking about water." It made a sound that might have been agreement. Then it did something that sent a chill down my spine. It swept its arm in a wide arc, encompassing the ranch, the pens, the distant town, the whole darkened landscape, and tapped the canteen again. Not just me. All of this. All of you. I understood. The creature drank blood. Yes. A few goats. A few chickens. Enough to survive. But we, humanity, we were draining rivers, punching wells deep into the earth, diverting entire waterways to keep our livestock fat and our glasses full. Our thirst was measured in millions of gallons. Our hunger was industrial. "We're the thirsty ones," I whispered. The creature held my gaze for a long moment, then picked up the canteen and vanished into the night. I sat there until dawn, staring at the empty trough, thinking about every faucet I had ever turned on without thought, every glass of water I had poured and forgotten, every shower I had taken while the land around me cracked and bled. That was the second confession. By October, the rumors had spread. People in town were talking about a Chupacabra, a goat-sucker. The name had started as a joke, something the old women whispered to frighten children, but it was gaining traction. A creature that walked on 2 legs, with red eyes and a taste for blood. The priest gave a sermon about superstition and the devil's ability to exploit fear. The mayor blamed wild dogs and offered a bounty for anyone who could bring proof. The younger men organized hunting parties, driving into the hills with rifles and beer, returning with nothing but empty shells and exaggerated stories. Arturo refused to acknowledge what was happening. Every time I tried to bring it up, carefully, vaguely, he shut me down. One morning, standing over a freshly drained calf, he told his workers, "This is thieves. They're using tools. There is no monster here." His voice was steady, but his hands shook. I looked toward the ridge. The creature was there, barely visible against the rocks, watching. When the workers dispersed, I walked out to the edge of the property. The creature met me halfway, moving through the scrub with that eerie, fluid silence. It pointed at the dead calf in the distance, then at the ranch house, then at its own head. Slowly, deliberately, it covered its eyes with both hands. I understood immediately. You see what is happening. You know what I am. And still, you cover your eyes. Humans were not afraid of monsters. What terrified us was admitting the monster was real, because then we'd have to change. We'd have to act. We'd have to face the fact that our comfortable explanations, thieves, dogs, bad luck, were lies we told ourselves to avoid uncomfortable truths. The creature lowered its hands and stared at me with something that looked like pity. That was the third confession. Your species is addicted to denial. It turned and walked back into the hills, and I stood there alone, knowing it was right. Arturo was desperate. The drought had broken over the winter, but the damage was done. Half his herd was gone, sold, dead, or simply vanished into the hills. The remaining animals were skittish, weak. Predators, both natural and otherwise, had tasted blood, and they kept coming back. In March, Arturo bought chemicals. They arrived in unmarked white barrels loaded onto the back of a truck driven by a man in a suit who didn't bother to get out. Arturo and 2 of his workers unloaded the barrels and stacked them in the barn. I watched from a distance, uneasy. "What is that?" I asked when Arturo walked past, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Pesticide," he said, "for the rats, the bugs, whatever's eating the feed. That's a lot of pesticide." He gave me a hard look. "You have a better solution?" I didn't. Within a week, the ranch smelled different. Sharp. Chemical. My eyes watered when the wind shifted from the fields. Small animals started appearing dead near the fence line. Rabbits, a few birds, a stray dog that had been hanging around the kitchen. Their bodies were stiff, mouths open, tongues dark and swollen. The creature's behavior changed. It came less often, and when it did, it was cautious. I watched it approach a goat one night, sniff the animal carefully, and then back away without feeding. It moved to the chicken coop instead, selecting an older hen that had been kept in a separate pen, away from the treated feed. It was learning to avoid the poison, but not fast enough. One night in late April, I found the creature by the dry creek bed. It was hunched over, body convulsing, foam at the corners of its mouth. The sounds it made were awful, guttural, wet, desperate. Its claws scraped frantically at the ground, gouging deep lines in the dirt. I approached slowly, heart pounding. "Easy," I said softly, the way you'd speak to a wounded animal. "Easy." It turned its head toward me, eyes unfocused, pupils dilated. For the first time since I'd known it, the creature looked vulnerable, mortal. With shaking hands, it drew something in the dirt, a rough outline of a goat. Around the goat, it scratched small circles, dozens of them, frantic and uneven. Then it tapped its chest and doubled over with another spasm. When it could move again, it drew a stick figure, crude but recognizable as human. Around that figure, it scratched the same circles. I stared at the drawing. "You're saying we poisoned the goats?" I said slowly. "So, and when you fed on them, you were poisoned too." The creature made a sound, half growl, half whimper. "But we're poisoned too," I continued, realization settling over me like cold water. "The same chemicals that got into the goats are in our water, our food, our air." The creature's eyes met mine. In that moment, I saw something I hadn't expected. Not just pain, but accusation. "You did this. To me. To yourselves. To everything." It curled onto its side, breathing shallow. I sat beside it, unsure of what to do, knowing there was nothing I could do. After a long time, the convulsions stopped. The creature lay still, its chest rising and falling in slow, labored breaths. I stayed until dawn. When the first light broke over the hills, the creature stirred, rose unsteadily to its feet, and limped away without looking back. That was the fourth confession. "You are poisoning the very things that keep you alive." I walked back to the ranch as the sun climbed higher, thinking about every meal I'd ever eaten, every breath I'd taken, every sip of water I'd swallowed, wondering how much poison I carried in my own body. The hunters came in waves. First, it was locals, men from town with too much time and too many guns, looking for an excuse to play hero. They set up camps on the edges of the ranch, drinking beer around fires, shooting at shadows, and leaving trash everywhere they went. Arturo tolerated them at first. He even encouraged them. "Maybe they'll scare it off," he said. They didn't scare it off. They scared everything else. Deer vanished. Coyotes went silent. Even the birds seemed to avoid the area. The creature, for its part, stayed away for weeks at a time. When it did appear, it was more cautious, moving only on the darkest nights, avoiding the open spaces near the ranch. I hated the hunters. They were loud, careless, dangerous. One night, 2 of them got drunk and fired at a shadow near the goat pen. They missed the shadow and hit a goat instead. In the morning, they laughed about it, called it collateral damage, and drove away without burying the animal. The creature returned 2 nights later. It came to the fence near my post, moving low and fast. In the moonlight, I could see new scars on its flank, a graze from a bullet, still raw and red. It pointed toward the barn where the hunters had been sleeping earlier that week, then gestured at the horizon, a sweeping motion that seemed to encompass the entire human world. It tapped its chest, then made a gesture I had come to recognize, holding up one hand, fingers spread, then slowly closing them into a fist. Small, alone, vulnerable. Then it pointed at me, at the barn, at the town lights in the distance, and held up both hands, fingers spread wide, and made a noise, a low, rattling sound that vibrated in my chest. Many together, dangerous. I understood. The creature killed out of necessity. A goat here, a chicken there. Survival. We killed out of fear. And when we were afraid, we came in numbers, with weapons, with fire, with the absolute certainty that we had the right to destroy whatever frightened us. The fifth confession was the simplest and the most damning. You are far more dangerous when you are afraid than when you are hungry. The creature held my gaze for a long moment, then turned and disappeared into the scrub. I stood at the fence, listening to the distant laughter of the hunters, and felt a deep, pervasive shame. In the fall of 1979, Rancho San Miguel finally collapsed. Arturo sold what was left of his herd, paid off his debts, and moved in with his daughter in Saltillo. The land was bought by a developer who planned to turn it into vacation homes for Americans. I was out of a job. I drove north, across the border, and found work in a small Texas town called Carrizo Springs. I rented a cheap room above a hardware store and took a job as a night watchman at a warehouse that stored agricultural equipment. I told myself the creature belonged to the ranch, to that specific valley, to a chapter of my life I was closing. I was wrong. 3 months after I moved, I saw it again. I was on my midnight break, sitting on a stack of wooden pallets behind the warehouse, eating a sandwich and staring at nothing. The air smelled like diesel and dust. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Then I felt it, that familiar pressure, the weight of being watched. I turned slowly. The creature stood at the edge of the drainage ditch, partially hidden in shadow. It was thinner than I remembered, its movements stiffer. The scars I'd seen before had been joined by new ones, and there were patches where the skin looked rough, almost burned. Dios mío, I whispered. Where you followed me. It stepped into the faint light cast by the single bulb above the warehouse door. Up close, I could see how much it had aged. The bristles along its spine were patchy. Its eyes, still sharp, were surrounded by deeper wrinkles. Between us lay the drainage ditch, lined with trash, plastic bags, fast food wrappers, broken glass, a rusted shopping cart half buried in mud. The creature stared at the trash for a long time. Then it approached the edge of the ditch, reached down, and picked up a crumpled burger wrapper between 2 fingers. It sniffed it, recoiled slightly, and dropped it as if it had burned. It pointed at the wrapper, then up at the warehouse, the streetlights, the town glowing in the distance. Then it pointed at me. You don't even bother to hide your waste anymore. You live in it. I looked at the ditch, really looked at it for the first time. It was full of garbage, months, maybe years of accumulated trash that no one had bothered to clean. The water that ran through it after rainstorms was rainbow-slicked with oil, stinking of rot. I know, I said quietly. I know. The creature made a soft sound, something between a sigh and a growl. It looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. Then it turned and climbed out of the ditch, moving slowly, favoring its left leg. I watched it disappear into the empty lot beyond the warehouse, and I sat there for a long time, surrounded by the smell of garbage and gasoline, feeling sick. Over the next 2 years, I saw the creature sporadically. Sometimes 6 months would pass with no sign. Then, on some sleepless night, I would step outside for a cigarette and catch a glimpse of a familiar shape on a rooftop or a distant fence. The creature was adapting to our sprawl. It followed the goats and chickens and stray dogs that followed human settlements. It learned to navigate our world, our trash, our fences, our roads. But the adaptation had a cost. Each time I saw it, it looked worse. Its fur thinned. Its eyes grew cloudier. Its shoulders hunched under some invisible weight. It moved like an old man, careful and pained. I wasn't doing much better. I was 46 now, with gray hair at my temples and a persistent cough from too many years breathing dust and cigarette smoke. My ex-wife had remarried. My son, Miguel, was in college and hadn't called me in 3 years. One night in the summer of 1982, the creature appeared outside my apartment. I had just gotten home from my shift, exhausted, my back aching. I stepped outside to throw away a bag of trash, and there it was, standing by the dumpster, illuminated by the flickering streetlight. We stared at each other. The creature looked at the trash bag in my hand, then at the overflowing dumpster, then at me. It made a gesture I had seen before, tapping its chest, then mine. We are the same, both trying to survive in a world that doesn't want us. That was the 6th confession, unspoken but clear. We were both animals, aging and alone, struggling to make sense of a world that had changed faster than we could adapt. I set the trash bag down gently. The creature approached, sniffed it, and then, with surprising tenderness, pushed the bag toward the dumpster as if helping me. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. Yeah, thanks. It tilted its head, watching me with those ancient, tired eyes. For a moment, I considered inviting it inside, offering it water, food, shelter, but I knew it wouldn't come. It had learned, as I had learned, that the safest place was always just outside the reach of others. The creature turned and walked away, limping slightly, and I went inside and lay awake until dawn, thinking about loneliness and survival and the things we lose when we refuse to connect. I turned 50 in 1988. The number felt absurd, impossible. Somewhere in the blur of night shifts and cigarettes and lonely mornings, 2 decades had evaporated. My body reminded me constantly, bad knees, a persistent ache in my lower back, hearing that wasn't what it used to be, and a heart that occasionally skipped beats like a scratched record. My doctor, a tired-looking woman named Dr. Ramirez, told me I needed to quit smoking, lose weight, and reduce stress. I laughed. Stress was all I had left. Miguel called me once that year, in November. He was 32, married, living in Austin, working for a tech company I didn't understand. He told me I was going to be a grandfather, a girl, due in March. "That's wonderful, mijo," I said, my voice cracking. "Her name will be Sophia," he said. Then, after a pause, "You should come visit. Meet her." "I will," I lied. I never visited. I told myself I was too busy, too broke, too tired. The truth was simpler and more cowardly. I didn't think I deserved to be part of their lives. I had been absent for so long that my presence felt like an intrusion. The creature, I suspected, understood that feeling better than anyone. By the mid-'80s, the creature's visits had become rare. I would see it maybe once or twice a year, always at a distance, always moving through the margins of human spaces, alleys, empty lots, the edges of parking lots. It looked worse each time, more skeletal, more worn. One night in 1986, I saw it near an overpass on the outskirts of town, picking through trash left by highway workers. It moved slowly, methodically, sorting through plastic bags and discarded food containers with an almost human focus. I stopped my truck on the shoulder and watched. After a few minutes, it sensed me and looked up. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the distance, 2 old creatures who had somehow ended up in the same broken world. Then it raised one hand, not a wave, not a threat, just an acknowledgement, and turned back to the trash. I drove away, throat tight, thinking about dignity and what it costs to survive. Something changed in the late 80s. Maybe it was my age, or maybe it was the way the world itself seemed to be accelerating. Everywhere I looked, there was more. More cars, more buildings, more trash, more noise. The town I had moved to in 1979 had doubled in size. New housing developments sprawled across land that had been empty scrub just a few years before. The sky changed, too. On clear nights, when I stepped outside after my shift, the stars were fainter. The darkness was less dark, washed out by the glow of streetlights, car dealerships, the 24-hour gas station that had opened down the road. One night in August 1988, I looked up and realized I couldn't see the Milky Way anymore. The sky was a dull orange, backlit by sodium vapor lights, thick with haze. I stood there for a long time, trying to remember what the stars had looked like when I was young, when my father had taken me into the hills outside Monterey and shown me the constellations. I couldn't remember. The creature appeared that night, as if summoned by my sadness. It stood at the edge of the warehouse parking lot, half hidden behind a dumpster. When it saw me, it didn't approach. It simply looked up at the same sky I had been staring at. We stood like that for several minutes, both of us gazing at the orange haze where stars used to be. Finally, the creature lowered its head and looked at me. It pointed at the sky, then at the lights of the town, then swept its hand in a slow, encompassing gesture that included everything: the buildings, the roads, the glow, the noise. It touched its chest, then opened its hand and let it fall, palm down, as if dropping something. Lost, gone, taken. I nodded. I know. The creature made a low sound, almost mournful, and disappeared into the night. That was the 7th confession. You have stolen the night itself. The world felt like it was ending in those years, or maybe just transforming into something I no longer recognized. The Berlin Wall came down in November of '89. I watched it on the small black and white TV in my apartment, people dancing on the rubble, and I felt nothing. Someone at the warehouse said it meant the Cold War was over, that we had won. I didn't ask what we had won. Closer to home, things were getting worse. The summer of 1990 was the hottest on record. The heat pressed down like a physical weight, day after day, week after week. People died, mostly the old, the poor, the ones without air conditioning. Animals died, too. I found dead birds on the pavement outside the warehouse, their tiny bodies baked dry. The creature came more often that summer, and its behavior was different, agitated, urgent. One night in July, it appeared at the fence behind my apartment building. I was sitting outside on a folding chair, too hot to sleep, drinking warm beer and listening to the hum of distant traffic. The creature approached closer than it had in years, stopping maybe 10 feet away. Its breathing was labored, wheezing. The scars on its body had multiplied, and there were patches where the skin looked raw, almost burned. It pointed at the sky, still glowing orange despite the late hour, and made a sound I had never heard before, a series of sharp clicks, rising in pitch, almost frantic. Then it gestured at the ground, at the dead grass, the cracked pavement, the wilting bushes. It touched its own chest, then pointed at me, then made a sweeping motion that included everything around us. Finally, it drew something in the dirt with one claw, a circle. Inside the circle, rough lines radiating outward. Then, slowly, it dragged its claw through the circle, collapsing the lines inward. I stared at the drawing. "You're saying we're running out of time?" The creature held my gaze, unblinking. "You're saying this is our fault, the heat, the poison, the dying." It tapped the collapsed circle once, firmly, then looked at me with something that felt like desperation. "Do something, please." But what could I do? I was a 54-year-old night watchman with a bad back and no money. I couldn't fix the world. I couldn't even fix myself. The creature seemed to understand my helplessness. Its shoulders sagged. It made one last sound, soft, resigned, and turned to leave. "Wait," I said. It stopped, but didn't turn around. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm sorry we did this." The creature's head lowered slightly. Then it walked away, and I sat there in the hot, still air, crying for the first time in years. The last time I saw the creature was on March 22nd, 1991. I remember the date because it was exactly 1 week after my 55th birthday, which I had spent alone with a bottle of cheap whiskey and a sense of impending finality. My doctor had used words like hypertension and angina. She'd given me prescriptions I couldn't afford and advice I wouldn't follow. My son had called briefly, and we had a stilted conversation in which he told me about Sophia, now 3 years old, talking in full sentences, asking about her grandfather she'd never met. "Maybe this summer," I said. "Sure, Dad," he replied, in a tone that said he didn't believe me. I had just finished my shift and was walking home, the sun not yet up, when I felt that familiar pressure. I turned. The creature stood by the chain-link fence that separated the sidewalk from an empty lot. In the dim pre-dawn light, it looked less like a monster and more like a ghost. It was skeletal, its ribs visible through patchy skin, its movements slow and pained. The eyes that had once reflected red now looked cloudy, milky at the edges. We stared at each other for a long time. Then the creature gestured for me to follow. I did. It led me to the edge of town, to a place where the development stopped abruptly and gave way to scrubland. There, beside a dry wash, was a small pile of objects arranged with obvious care. Bones, mostly, cleaned and white, but also stones, bits of metal, and a single photograph. One I recognized immediately. It was the photo from my wallet. A picture of me and Miguel, taken when he was 8 years old, both of us smiling at the camera. I had lost my wallet 6 months ago and assumed it had been stolen. The creature must have found it, kept it, added it to this strange collection. I knelt beside the pile, tears blurring my vision. "What is this?" I asked. The creature pointed at the bones, then at the stones, then at the photograph. It touched its chest, then mine. Memory, connection, proof that we existed. I understood. This was a memorial, not for the dead, but for the dying, for the world we had lost, the world we were losing, and the fragile, improbable connection between two creatures who shouldn't have understood each other, but somehow did. The creature sat down heavily beside the pile, breathing hard. It pointed at the town in the distance, the sprawl of buildings, the glow of lights, the haze hanging in the air. Then it drew the same symbol it had drawn before, the circle with radiating lines. And again, it dragged its claw through the middle, collapsing everything inward. But this time, it added something new. Beside the collapsed circle, it drew two small figures, one with 4 legs, one with 2, both inside the ruins. I stared at the drawing, my chest tight. You're saying we're going to die together, all of us. The creature made a soft, mournful sound. Not from you, not from predators or monsters, from ourselves. It nodded, a gesture it had learned from watching me. That was the final confession, the most terrifying one. I was never your worst predator. You are. We sat there as the sun rose, 2 old animals who had somehow found each other in the margins, both knowing this was the last time. When the light grew too bright, the creature struggled to its feet. It looked at me one last time, touched the photograph gently with one claw, and then turned and walked into the scrubland. I watched until it disappeared completely, swallowed by the heat and the distance. I never saw it again. I am 89 years old now, and my hands shake when I button my shirt. I live in a small assisted living facility in San Antonio. My son visits once a month, always apologetic, always busy. Sophia, now 34, came to see me last Christmas with her own daughter, my great-granddaughter, Elena, who is 6 years old and afraid of nothing. She asked me if I believed in monsters. I looked at her for a long time. This bright-eyed child who had never known a sky full of stars, who drank from plastic bottles and ate food wrapped in plastic and lived in a world built on the bones of the one I remembered. Yes, I said, I believe in monsters. Are they scary? Not as scary as we are, I told her. She didn't understand. Maybe someday she will. I'm telling this story now because I am dying. The doctors say I have maybe a year, maybe less. My heart is tired. My body is tired. I have carried this secret for more than 50 years, and I do not want it to die with me. People will say I imagined it, that isolation and loneliness conjured a creature that never existed. Let them say it. I know what I saw. I know what it taught me. The Chupacabra was real, and everything it confessed about humanity, our thirst, our denial, our poisons, our fear, our waste, our theft of the night, our willingness to destroy ourselves, all of it was true. I met a monster in the 1970s, and it showed me that the real horror was never the thing with red eyes and sharp teeth hiding in the dark. The real horror was us, what we do, what we refuse to see, what we leave behind. And the most terrifying part? We're still doing it. My name is Daniel Reyes, and this is the truth I have avoided telling my entire adult life. I cannot hold it in anymore.